Conflict and behavior problems are growing issues in our schools that appear to be mirroring Canada's ever-escalating incarceration rates. While punitive justice systems prove less and less effective at curbing destructive behaviors in at-risk youth, our systemic failure to resolve conflict in a way that allows for those affected to learn, grow, heal, or gain closure from the resolution process has done a grave disservice to the culture of our schools. Emerging restorative justice programs, however, have shown very promising results in a variety of locations across the globe, primarily throughout Canada, the US, England, and New Zealand. Although the modern restorative justice movement began to emerge in Western societies in and around the 1970s, restorative practices have been the go-to method for conflict resolution in many Indigenous cultures across North America and New Zealand throughout history. One of the first implementations of restorative practices in a Western school setting, a pilot program at Palisades High School in Pennsylvania in 1998, demonstrated reductions ranging between 35 and 60% across the board in disciplinary referrals to the office, behavioral incidents, detentions, and suspensions. The movement gained momentum, and more schools began to implement restorative justice programs as policy. Longitudinal studies have been initiated across Canada, the US, England, and New Zealand over the past decade, and though we currently lack the luxury of long-term data, these studies reflect reductions in destructive behaviors consistent with those seen at Palisades High. In a nutshell, the data speaks for itself. Restorative justice programs in schools have initiated tremendously powerful changes toward more cohesive and peaceful communities, rehabilitating young offenders back into society rather than resorting to exile and complete dismissal of students' capacity for change. In addition to extolling the many virtues of and arguments for the use of restorative justice in schools, however, I feel it is also my duty to address the opposite side of the coin, which consists of a corresponding overview of the limitations of restorative justice and the conditions necessary for its appropriate, ethical, and successful implementation. There are indeed some scenarios in which it would be completely inappropriate, irresponsible, and quite frankly unethical to apply restorative justice as a means for conflict resolution. In fact, recent controversy at Dalhousie University and the administration's decision to handle the issues through restorative processes have incited vigorous debate across the country as to whether the implementation of restorative justice is appropriate under these particular conditions. Just over a month ago, a private Facebook group maintained by 13 or more male members of the Dalhousie School of Dentistry was publicized, revealing misogynistic postings and commentary, endorsing and joking about hate sex, violence against women, and drugging women with chloroform, some of which contained images of 4 different females from the dentistry class. This disturbing situation provides a pertinent example from which one can tease out the limitations of a system like restorative justice. Part of the difficulty in analyzing restorative justice, however, is that there is no single agreed-upon form of restorative justice. Rather, restorative justice is an umbrella term with the general philosophy of repairing harm done to a community that encompasses a wide variety of processes, from mediation to family, community, or group conferencing, to talking circles, peace circles, and sentencing circles, and the list goes on. For this reason, it is imperative that when a school makes the decision to address offenses through restorative processes, there must first be a very clearly outlined policy of conditions under which a given process will and will not be applied. After an extensive study of reputable and internationally recognized restorative justice organizations and their criteria and policies, I've assembled a list of common criteria that surfaced again and again. Number 1. All affected parties have agreed to participate in the process. This means victims, offenders, and any community members who've been impacted. Restorative justice is an entirely voluntary process where everyone impacted is a willing participant and has agreed to proceed of their own volition with no coercion whatsoever from the outset of the proceedings. In terms of the Dalhousie dentistry debacle, this is quite simply not the case. While the university maintains that 2 of the 4 women pictured in the postings have consented to participate in the restorative justice process, the other 2 women have publicly voiced their opposition to the process, while 4 anonymous women from the class have written an open letter voicing their opposition to the process, and 4 named Dalhousie staff members have issued a formal complaint on behalf of the victims in opposition to the process. Even if all 4 women whose pictures appeared in the postings had expressed their approval, there would still be an issue of purview, as several of the comments were offensive and discriminatory to women in general, and thus the scope of victims expands far beyond the realm of the 44 dentistry students. And thus the university's prioritization of confidentiality and anonymity for the offenders over the dissemination of accurate information to the victims and the community, and garnering of input and consent for the process, has largely functioned to further alienate the affected parties. Number 2. To ensure just proceedings, restorative justice must be administered by an impartial third party. This means that there can be no affiliation between those facilitating the process and those involved in the harm committed, either on the side of the victims or of the offenders. This also appears not to be the case with the restorative justice proceedings at Dalhousie. On their website, the university has explicitly confirmed, and I quote, "The university is always an active partner in a restorative justice process. There are several offices within Dalhousie who could be involved in a restorative program for students," unquote. The page then goes on to name 4 separate university departments that are directly affiliated with the university and located on its campus. Many citizens have publicly voiced their concern regarding the university's handling of the situation due to significant delays in issuing public statements, withholding of information from affected parties, lack of consultation of several victims about the process, etc., etc. There has thus been widespread concern about the university's responsibility to delegate proceedings to an impartial third party, prompted by opinions that the university itself has partially contributed to the victimization of and discrimination towards the female dentistry students. Number 3. Facilitators must be properly trained. This condition is particularly problematic because as there is no universally recognized regulatory body for restorative justice processes, there is also no universally accepted training program. While many people accept those who've undergone a training or certification process of some sort to be qualified to administer the proceedings, many mental health professionals have expressed concern that, especially in the case of vulnerable individuals where post-traumatic stress may be a factor, only certified mental health professionals themselves should be entrusted to oversee the proceedings in order to prevent potential re-victimization of participants. Indeed, many of those in opposition to restorative justice for the dentistry students have argued that restorative justice is never appropriate in response to instances of sexual assault, domestic violence, or situations where an extreme power differential exists for precisely these reasons. Therefore, by viewing restorative justice and its potential limitations through the lens of issues raised in regards to the current controversy at Dalhousie, one can safely deduce the following conclusions. Restorative justice yields far superior results to punitive justice measures for curbing school conflict and behavioral incidents, but there are conditions under which restorative justice is not an appropriate recourse. All affected parties must have agreed to participate in the process. To ensure just proceedings, restorative justice must be administered by an impartial third party, and facilitators must receive proper training. These conditions are important to keep in mind when planning to initiate a restorative justice program in a high school. While incredibly beneficial in many cases, ethical issues must be taken into account and clearly outlined in school policy before the program is put into action. That's all for now. Thanks for listening.